for participating, to the community, to committee for putting this thing together. It's just been an awesome event at kind of building relationships across this industry. Anyway, I'm going to talk to you about ranch as ecosystem as related to what we do. And I'm going to take you right away up into our Hat Creek country because we kind of have two pieces to our ranch. We have a 900-acre piece of bottom ground in the bottom of the valley. We worked on that right away to try to get that performing well in terms of ecosystem with riparian buffers, a conservation easement on that place. And then our attention was turned to the Hat Creek Range. 70% of our green forage consumed every year comes off this wild range landscape. It's 70 square miles of broken mountain country, ranging in elevation from 4,000 feet down in this Salmon River Canyon area, all the way up to 9,500 feet, which is actually behind me. These cattle right now are at about 6,500 feet. And our equivalent elevation would be just below this rocky snow line. It's where we'd end up behind me at the end of the summer. So you can see there's a ton of diversity out there, both in terms of plant types and elevation aspect. There's 55 miles of perennial creek. There's hundreds of wet meadows and springs. It's a combination of ownership of Forest Service, BLM, state, and our deeded ground. Forest Service, BLM are each about 23,000 acres. State's about 1,000. We're about 1,000 in the middle of it. It's 100% certified organic. And just to give you some perspective on certified organic, 1% of all certified organic acres in the US is Alder Springs. And that's not like a bragging thing, but it's very interesting to me because it tells me that most certified organic operations in the US are pretty small operations. They're 5, 25-acre type deals. Now, if a bunch of us in this room here, in the bigger country of the West, South Dakota and whatnot, became certified organic, well, that would completely change. But it's most of these smaller farmers that are. There's a lot of species of concern. Some are listed, threatened, endangered. Some are state sensitive. Some are just issues to be watching for. Bull trout, also known as Dolly Varden trout, if you're an older Western individual. Wolves, sage grouse. We have 5 threatened endangered plants that are unique to only our area, nowhere else in the world. And there's a recovering herd of bighorn sheep that actually roams right on this mountain right here. In fact, there's an area of critical environmental concern that we actually graze, but we graze very carefully there. It's essentially wilderness. There's very few roads. It's been exposed to 150 years of continuous grazing. And, in the early part of the 20th century, that was as many as 5,000 head of cows. And I'm not even talking about the 10,000 head of sheep. So very, very long-term, full duration grazing and high impact. It really altered a lot of this rangeland ecosystem. There's 500 native plants up there. I know this because I'm married to a PhD botanist, and she knows what they are. And 300 of those are plants that our cattle eat. I've seen them. We spend a lot of time on horseback up there, and I'm just watching them eat these plants, and you can actually tally them up. We took over management of this rangeland in '05. And, there's these hugely degraded riparian areas, 55 miles of creeks, right? And this continuous grazing thing caused these head cuts that are 5 to 10 feet high. There was a lot of soil loss, floodplains dropped. We lost woody species. We're missing beavers. Aspen was on the way out. We had a lot of historical aspen communities as evidenced by dead trees. And riparian species were being replaced by non-natives like Kentucky bluegrass. Upland species were being replaced with cheatgrass. So huge problems, and we thought in a cavalier way, we could fix this. We know what's wrong. So we came in on horseback, and we're riding 4 or 5 days a week. And we're doing this right here. We're taking mama cows out of riparian areas and pushing them up on the uplands. The only problem is we had 250 to 350 pairs of mama cows up there, 70 square miles. Couldn't find them all on a given day. So there were cows behaving badly somewhere up there on that range, simply because we couldn't find them all. It was impossible. It was a logistical nightmare. Well, we did this, and each year we'd say, hey, we're going to do it better next year, and ended up falling flat on our face. So now, what? We weren't falling off the wagon anymore. We were like hanging on the tailgate, so the ecosystem stuff wasn't falling off the wagon anymore. But we didn't know how long we could hang on to the tailgate. It was a tenuous existence, and we thought at any time with a big rain event or something like that, everything could go gunny sacks because we weren't really getting ahead on what we want to do regeneratively. So I talked to you yesterday about wolves. There's a bunch of stimuli that cause us to think about things differently. They were catalysts in the formulation of an idea. And what we really realized that we needed to do was mimic mountain bison. We had bison horns on our place up there on that range. We had bison wallows. We knew bison were there. Prehistoric evidence from American Fur Company journals indicated that there were small herds of bison all through this ecosystem up there. And we thought, what were the size of those herds? It was 10 to 400 head, probably average herd size, in very difficult and broken country. That's why we didn't have 100,000 head herds or anything like that, because you could see how incised a lot of this topography was. So we started running cattle like this. We started running them in bunches just like this. And these were our goals. We thought we could stimulate aspen regeneration in these aspen problem areas because aspen needs mechanical or some sort of pulse disturbance like fire or mechanical disturbance along the roots to stimulate regrowth. So we thought, this is cool. We could maybe get aspen to come back. We could actually take very dense sagebrush areas, like these areas in here, where we have mountain big sage that's even difficult to ride a horse through. We thought, hey, we could actually concentrate grazing there or put our bedding grounds in places like that and get some snow interception loss relief. Interception is where snow comes down, gets in the canopies of the sagebrush, and actually sublimates into the atmosphere rather than getting onto the ground, instead of getting us water down on the ground. So these were exciting possibilities. We thought we could do these things. We also worked with some of the agencies and thought, hey, what if we ate down fire breaks so we could use prescribed fire as a tool for aspen regeneration and dense sagebrush over mature production and fix that interception loss problem that way. So those were exciting possibilities. And then we thought, just for grass, on some of our degraded uplands where we had cheatgrass, maybe we could get some hoof action here and get some blue bunch wheatgrass native seed down for seed pulsing into the ground by cattle intentionally. So there was all these proactive things we could do with this thing we called in-herding. And we called it in-herding because we coined that word because it was kind of a play on Jim Garish's management intensive grazing. That's what we were doing on the ranch, moving cattle in hot wire paddocks across the landscape, except now we'd become the hot wire. So we called it in-herding for intensive herding. And this is what we do. And here's Jake and Anthony. These guys just started with us last summer. And this picture was taken last summer. We got about 250 head in this bunch they're in. And what they're doing is they're not just bullshitting here. They're actually not bullshitting at all, I guarantee it. Actually, they got a real problem with that. But anyway, what these two guys, they're a bunch of old ladies sometimes. What these two guys do is they're supposed to bump into each other. This is in a dark timber situation. Bump into each other, work around the herd, and meet again, and keep doing this all day while the herd's moving. And that way you keep tabs on everybody. Otherwise, in dark timber situations, guess what? You end up with missing cattle. Like I said yesterday, we got wolf situations. So we're night bedding these cattle every night in a hot wire paddock area. I'll show a little piece of that to you soon. But this is what it looks like. This is the first year we tried to do it. That's 150 head down there. That was the first year we did it 4 years ago. And that's what it looks like across the landscape. And that's the scale of the landscape. Everything you see below those mountains is in our range. Everything up to the timber is in our range. So it's just this, because we're doing this intensively, we can really judiciously decide where to put these cattle on a year-by-year basis and really strategize it. And in addition, we have a GPS unit in our saddlebags so we can map it at the end of the year, overlay it on Google, and know exactly for the next year where we were for the past 4 years. And this is what it looks like going across the landscape. This is about 200 head. You can see two of my best friends here. This is Gypsy Dave, and this is True Dog, and that's one of my daughters over there. And this is cow camp. Very, very simple. Okay, just the tarp for the kitchen, keep the wind and rain and snow off, and it snowed last week up there. And two backpacking tents, and you can see the very edge of the night paddock here with a hot wire around the cattle. There's 300 head in this night pen. Just above it is a horse pen. We stick our horses in there. We'll stick one horse in with the cattle at night in case these guys run off. Then you got something to go chase the ones that ran off with. Because one night I had a bunch of guys sleeping, horses got out. They ended up running 8 miles on barefoot because they got out of their tents, saw those horses, and ran after them. Horses ran a little farther, so they did this all night, and they couldn't hardly walk by the next day. So they started sleeping with their boots on. Anyway, so we call it in-herding. So this is what's happening, and this was a highly degraded riparian area in the old days. Now we got all kinds of new aspen regeneration and willow regeneration coming in here. These were mushroom-shaped willows that had a complete browse line by cattle. This creek was down cut with about 3-foot head cut banks all the way down. This is called Park Creek, and it's completely changing, and it's just very exciting to see. The other thing that's happening in Park Creek is that beavers are coming back in. We didn't have any beavers on 55 miles of creeks up there, but we had historical activity. I don't know where they're coming from, if they're parachuting in or what, but they're showing up. They're showing up, and it's just amazing to see what they're doing. So and this is really cool. Kentucky bluegrass, like I said, it's a weed. It's drowning because the beavers are increasing the height of the water table. All these riparian species are increasing height of water table. Kentucky bluegrass is drowning a sad death. And what's replacing it? Nebraska sedge and Baltic rush. They're on the upswing, and they're the native species. So here's the stats of what in-herding looks like on riparian areas. This is when we were managing it. This isn't before '05, but when we were aggressively riding those pairs, we had 70% impact on 55 miles of creeks. We saw yearly cattle use resulting in alteration of banks or vegetation. Now, this year in 17, we're down to 300 meters of any sign of riparian use by cattle. It's because we're just picking it. This is Big Hat Creek coming up here, and these cattle used to just camp in here and work this whole creek bottom, and we'd run them out up on the hill, and guess what? At night they'd come back down. Now last year in the summer, we had cattle right here, and we just herded them all the way across this hillside, all the way up here to a little high basin, and then herded them back, came down here, about a 100-meter area. We had a little hot wire funnel. We gave them a drink there, and head back to cow camp. So this is the kind of cool stuff. These aspen are new within the past 5 years. They're taking off like crazy because we finally relieved them of cattle browsing. And you know, the avian stuff is just intuitive. It's all about habitat. It's just all about creation of habitat and diversity. It's like diversity like Christine Jones has been talking about in terms of now not understory species like grasses and forbs, but it's the overstory of plants that's increasing our habitat diversity along with the insects. You know, insects require all that kind of habitat too. So we're seeing bull trout habitat increase as well, a listed species, and it's just because you know, we're increasing water volume and depth with all this water holding capability. And the other cool thing is beavers are storing more water upstream, and we're getting a lot more shade, which is great for trout, right? And like I said, we're getting aspen regeneration relief. So, and then sage-grouse, you know, we didn't used to see them when we started riding up here in '05. Very occasional. Now we see sage-grouse all the time. I wish I had numbers, but I don't. We just see them all the time. Just even along Big Hat Creek right here, you'll flush out sage chickens all the time. The other thing that's cool is this is our tall grass here. Here you got big blue stem. This is basin wild rye, and it will grow up to 8 feet tall in deep soils. And this grass was not here 8 years ago, and now it's finally releasing. We had these little vestigial stands that are finally taking off, and that's very exciting to see. And it's because de facto with in-herding, we have this you know, minimal use, because we're using areas only, say, once every 6 years now, because we're intentionally herding them from areas that we did not use them, unless if we want the disturbance. So increase in hydric soils equals an increase in soil biota. Christine Jones was talking about soil biota and the importance of it. It can't do well without water. So when we have soil biota, we have everything else getting added on top of that, all the way up the food chain. And we talked about water holding capability with floodplain width. And here, as a cattle producer, you can't forget about this stuff. So these cattle are coming off the range a lot fatter than they used to be, okay? Average daily gain is going to be empirically measured this year. We weighed every individual before we took them up. We're going to weigh them all individually as they come back, so we'll know those numbers. But Jim Garish is a neighbor of mine. He went up there with us one day and he said, I'll give you a tool to know what they're gaining up here. And I'm like, scratching my head. And guess what he looked at? He looked at the lowly cow pie. We now know our stuff, so to speak. This is being videotaped, so we know our stuff. And Jim Garish is a stuff expert, and he's a self-proclaimed stuff expert. Anyway, according to cow pie density, and Alan, have you been with him on this at all, talking about stuff? He would say probably, based on what we learned from him, we're running around 2.3 pounds a day right now, 2.3, 2.5 pounds a day on these cattle. All 2-year-olds, when they come off, great choice. We didn't have that before. They're building musculoskeletal, but they were not putting fat on. But now they're grading. And it was because they were camping out in the shade by creeks. This is steep country. Cattle will take the easiest route. And if you give them the opportunity, they'll just stay down there. And they'll eat Kentucky bluegrass all day long, and it'll look like a putting green, on and off, but they're losing weight in the meantime. Now we can choose the grass they go on and teach them how to eat those good grasses. They were traveling. Sometimes they did stay in the creeks. They would just walk for 20, 30 miles in a day if you let them do it, because they're teenagers. They don't even know. They're like this. We're going this way. Why are you going this way? Well, we're just going this way. Well, why are you going that way? Well, I think we're just going to go this way. And that's what they do. They just fall in a line behind each other. Unless if you put a stop to that and get them trained, they will do that all day long. And then we're picking up a flavor difference. We test New York strip off every beef we sell online, and there was a spike on flavor as soon as we hit the native ranges. And I think it's got to do with nutrient density due to vegetation diversity. And it's because of those 300 plant species that are edible up there. Huge amount of diversity. You're looking at blue bunch wheatgrass right now, but just like Christine Jones said, there's probably 60 to 70% forbs underneath that. And they're grazing them all. So it's become part of our protocol. So there's these uncomfortable questions that come up, and the first one is, well, are we taking care of this? Is it resolved? Well, I think we're resolving. I think we're in regenerative mode right now. But here's the real ugly one, okay? That's the one that all my neighbors say, well, does this pay? 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 Cattle prices are coming down. It's the thing everybody wants to know, right? And it's a great question. I talked to you about, the beef value already. I talked about grading choice. So from those standpoints, it pays, But here's the deal. Right now, this is 300 head right there with my daughter watching them. And if we scale this up to 400, just on what we pencil now and what our costs of operation are, we are equivalent to private pasture. We could lease irrigated pasture, put our cattle on it, get equivalent or better weight gains. I don't think we'll get the flavor. I don't think we'll get the health benefits. But we could rent private organic pasture for the same price as it would when we scaled up to 400 head. So the other cool thing is we can increase all the way up to 800 now because the BLM Forest Service like what we're doing. And they said, we will be flexible on this permit. We'll let you build up to 800. So then it's a no-brainer. We're talking great economies of scale. Here's the other thing. There's green capital available. So we've had some help with this thing all the way through. The Nature Conservancy we got their attention when they saw what we're doing in our riparian results. They said, we want to partner with you and help you create this idea. Because what I realized, when those guys took those cattle from Texas to Montana, they had systems in place for camps, for how to handle the cattle. So we spend 3 weeks in training with these interns now to get them trained up. And so we're investing not only in the green capital, but we're also investing in the next generation. So those things are cool. Nature Conservancy, the Idaho Governor's Office, Western Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Grant, and CERN all said, we want to join with you and help you get this idea started until you reach an economy of scale, then you can do it on your own. So they helped us formulate the idea, supplied interns, and it's been really cool. And you know, it's, to me, I don't see it as a subsidy, because we're actually selling a good or service, because they're getting green capital. To them, they're like, we are paying for something real. We're paying for a huge habitat benefit that nobody else is doing. So that's exciting, you know, and it can convey into all aspects of what we do. It isn't only this kind of crazy stuff up on the range. It could be stuff on private land. I'm renting water off my pivots because we have huge water savings because we don't do crops anymore. We continually, you know, run continuous pasture. And so we got a water savings. I get $20,000 a year from the Idaho Department of Fish and Game for fish habitat to support minimum stream flows downstream. So there's all kinds of things we got to think about in terms of green capital partners. We're in a new world today where there's people who want to see, you know, a real life benefit, and they're willing to pay you to do it. You know, as ranchers, we have huge investment capital in terms of green capital. We can attract labor. We get good kids. We had 55 applicants. We sorted them down to 6. And the cool thing is, you know, we can have them do this for 75% of the time, and then we can have them do the menial stuff at home. You know, they're moving pipe, they're putting up hot wire, and they enjoy doing it. But it's really hard to hire somebody to move pipe. Hey, we got, you know, 122 sticks of hand line we'd like you to move, you know. Nobody's going to come over for 122 sticks of hand line. They're going to do it for a day and get back on the plane, go back to Florida. You know, there's ain't going to be no deal. But if I can make them move the hand line on the 25% that we pay when they're off the range, they're like, this is living a dream. So then there's a valid story. You know, when there's cake out there and stuff like that, you know, I love carrot cake. I don't eat a lot of sugar, but man, when there's a carrot cake, I'm like, good deal. So you got this carrot cake, okay? And to me, that's our grass-fed beef. 350 head we sell a year in carrot cake. People buy from us for flavor, wellness, and integrity. Okay, but when you put cream cheese icing on that carrot cake, and you got the two next to each other and it's the same price, guess what? I get the one with the icing. This is the icing on the cake. It's the story. And we need to think about putting icing on the cake of our beef. You know, and bringing people in with story. So there's definitely economic value to that. And then there's ranch resilience. Like we've seen it this year. I talked about that a little bit the other day. You've got 3 or 4 inches rainfall. Because we understand our species diversity, we now have ranch resilience that we can still gain weight in there even though our key species was drying out. But the other species were doing good. All we needed to do is understand the ecological implications of where these species were on the map and how to get to them and conceptualize that. So we had a new level of ranch resilience. That was very exciting. We're maintaining ecosystem integrity, so we get all these species crossing over onto our grazable areas that are now increasing fertility on those grazing areas through natural means. And then we got increased water holding capability. The BLM and Forest Service stopped calling us to pull our cattle off early. They said, those guys are fine. And then there's this new economy. We could do what Lyle's doing. He's doing agritourism. You know, I get a lot of people who want to ride with us and are willing to pay to ride with us. We got all these carbon credit potential things. You know, there's all these other new economies that we could add to the ranch because we're taking care, we're providing an ecosystem service. And lastly, we do it because it's right. You know, and it's not really only about me. You know, that's my personal belief in doing what's right and being a steward and practicing husbandry on not only the critters that we raise, but the ones we share the landscape with. But there's more to the ecosystem. And that's one of the ecosystem components right there. That's one of my kids. And I see us as part of that. I see all these kids we bring in as interns. They're part of the ecosystem. We're providing a story in their life, a reality of doing something meaningful and connecting with wild landscapes. And to me, that's probably the most exciting thing. Thank you very much.
Let's give Glenn a hand.